Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Outer Rim Cantina. My name's Alan and today I'm here to talk about a recent article from CNET that basically is just a bashing of the sequel trilogy in favor of the prequel trilogy. Now, I don't hide the fact that I am a product of the prequels. I grew up around them and they are my Star Wars. I will watch any of those films any day of the week. Personally, I enjoy the prequels, cringeworthy writing and all, more than I do the originals. That being said, I still enjoy the original films as well because they're Star Wars, and I don't bash the originals or the people who enjoy them just because I like the prequels more. A guy by the name of David Priest, however, seems to think that liking the prequels more means that he can bash the sequels because they're apparently so much worse than the Star Wars we got in the early 2000s. In the article, Priest goes through 4 reasons he calls pieces of wisdom that make the prequels better than, quote, the Disney trilogy. That line right there is the main reason I'm making this video. Priest is writing these pieces of wisdom as fact, and not just his opinion. He honestly seems to think that just because he doesn't like the sequels and personally enjoys the prequels more, that somehow makes them inferior to the films that have come before. One of the first things he talks about is set pieces, and how Disney's feel more staged than Lucas' boundary-pushing VFX. Quote, compare, for instance, the space chase involving Obi-Wan and Jango Fett in the Attack of the Clones with the first flight of the Millennium Falcon in The Force Awakens. Lucas crafts something more than just a slick chase scene with tight maneuvering and flashy quick zooms. He plays with sound design, giving different ships and weapons different identities. He turns predator into prey halfway through the scene. He gives each side of the chase stakes, putting a child in one ship and a Jedi in the other. Disney's Star Wars movies just don't innovate. End quote. This is just another example of someone shitting on the sequels that doesn't actually watch the films. First of all, comparing the flight of the Falcon in The Force Awakens to the Obi-Wan and Jango chase is stupid because, well, context is a thing. The purpose of those two scenes for the overall story of their respective films are completely different, and trying to draw comparisons or differences between them without acknowledging the differences in context just makes the argument invalid. Second, if you think the chase scene with the Falcon doesn't have any stakes or risks, then again, David clearly didn't watch the scene before making this point in his article. Differences in filmmaking are going to happen in the 20 years from Attack of the Clones to The Force Awakens. Expecting the sequels to be made like a better version of the prequels is stupid. Next, David makes a point that I actually kind of agree with, and that's the lack of diversity of planets in The Force Awakens. We don't see any truly new worlds, just environments we've experienced before. Still though, The Last Jedi made up for that with Octo, Canto Bright, and Crate, and The Rise of Skywalker looks to be delivering even more new and exciting planets to us in December. The second piece of wisdom delivered in this article is about the sequel trilogy character arcs not being focused like the prequel trilogy character arcs. I'm not even sure how one could possibly draw this conclusion, because again, actually watching the films blows this right out of the water. More specifically, we're still missing the final chapter of this new trilogy, so all the character arcs are still incomplete, and might not make sense to someone who just wants to enjoy a movie with laser swords and space wizards. For those of us who actually search for the deeper meanings and story beats that are hinted at before they're thrown in our faces, the arcs of each of our sequel heroes are incredibly clear, and have basically been set in stone since The Force Awakens. We just get to see the journey of these characters as they become who and what they were always meant to be. Another complaint David has that makes the sequel trilogy bad in his mind is cameos of famous actors and actresses in the various Disney Star Wars films. Now, I honestly don't understand why anyone would remotely care about something like that, and if you really do, I think you should get your priorities straightened out, because there are plenty of other things to complain about that might actually be valid, but complaining about famous people in your space movie is, again, just stupid. Next, he goes on a tangent about plot armor, and is apparently upset the sequels aren't a, quote, bloodbath like the prequels. The difference for that is because, unlike the prequels, the sequels are just centered around a handful of main characters instead of throwing in a bunch of randoms who will have to be killed off for the story to proceed. Also, along the same line, the prequels were the setup for films and stories we already saw, hence calling them prequels. Most of the characters introduced in those films had to die for the story of the originals to make sense. The sequel trilogy doesn't have that issue because it's coming after both the previous trilogies. Again though, trying to draw comparisons that make the sequel trilogy seem inferior to the prequels is idiotic because they are two separate things. It also goes back to context, which I talked about at the start. The context for the two trilogies is completely different from one another, and therefore aren't really comparable. The prequels are set up for the story we saw in the originals, and the sequels continue that story that was set up in the prequels and continued in the originals. Last but not least, David ends the article by talking about The Last Jedi. Even though the film gets praise from both critics and fans who wanted a return to something new, different, and exciting than what The Force Awakens gave us, he seems to think it, quote, missed the point. Personally, I love The Last Jedi because, in my view, it was a return to the new, exciting, and innovative Star Wars we got with the prequels. And while some people might not have liked the more Marvel-esque humor in the film, like our friend David here, I feel like that was introduced to play off the deeper emotional impact the film was meant to have. Rian Johnson took the modern mythology of Star Wars and cranked it up to 11, giving us something truly unique that we haven't experienced before in either the Skywalker saga or Star Wars franchise as a whole. While some people might not like it, some people don't like the prequels either, or even the originals. The point is, and I find myself going back to this every time something like this article comes up, Star Wars is for everyone. The beauty of this franchise and these stories is that there is no right or wrong way to see, interpret, or connect with them. Just because you might not like a particular story or trilogy more than another, it doesn't mean the other stories are bad, it just means they aren't particularly for you. The original trilogy isn't particularly for me, but do I go around tearing it down and ripping apart all the lazy writing, plot holes, and plot armor in those films? No, I don't, because everyone likes something different, and that doesn't make another thing bad. Sometimes I wish social media didn't exist, so people like David Priest would be confined to fan magazines and chat rooms where his bullshit views would stay relatively contained. But then again, if social media didn't exist, I wouldn't be able to meet all of you amazing fans that watch a nerd like me stand here and talk about Star Wars. That's all I've got to say about this article. As always, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments, either on your opinion of the article or what your favorite trilogy is. If you enjoyed this video or any of the other content here in the Cantina, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like on the video, as those actually really do help a small channel like this. And consider subscribing if you want more Outer Rim Cantina content in your sub box every week. That's all the time I've got today. I hope to see you back here in the Cantina on Saturday for another Star Wars video. Until then, may the Force be with you.